The law did not allow them to be in that field. Leviticus 13:46 required anyone with the disease to live outside the camp, alone, and to call out a warning before any healthy person came near. The word they were commanded to shout was tameh, unclean, a two-syllable exile repeated every time a traveler approached. On a dust-white road between Galilee and Samaria, 10 men who were supposed to cry that word cried a different one instead. They shouted the name of Jesus. They broke the sound the law had put in their mouths and replaced it with a request. Luke 17:12 records the distance. They stood afar off. It does not say how far. The rabbinic rulings preserved in the Mishnah suggest roughly 4 cubits in open wind, farther downwind so the breath would not reach a clean man's face. Picture it. 10 figures on the shoulder of the road, rag-wrapped hands, skin the color of old linen. The smell that travels before them is the reason the children on the next hill have already been pulled inside. And still, 10 voices, cracked from disuse or from the disease itself, rise together across the gap. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. 3 things I want you to carry out of this story before it ends. The first is a Greek word that appears in verse 14 before anyone's skin had changed. Ekatharisthesan, they were cleansed, spoken in a tense that places the healing inside the walking and not at the end of it. The second is a sentence Jesus said to one man that he did not say to the other 9, a sentence built on a verb, sozo, that the translators have been softening for centuries. The third is the identity of the only one who turned around, and why the text waits until the middle of the scene to tell you who he was. If this is the kind of slow, careful attention to the text that you have been hungry for, subscribe. There is more work like this coming. Now return to the road. It is the border country, the thin strip where Galilee bleeds into Samaria, a place where a Jewish rabbi walking south would normally cross quickly and keep his eyes on the horizon. Jesus does not hurry. He is already outside the village when the cry reaches him. 10 men who were told by Moses to warn the world away have used their exile voice to call a rabbi in. They are asking a question the law did not give them permission to ask. And somewhere in that broken request, in the moment a man decides to shout for help from a distance he was never supposed to cross, a door opens that the law could not have opened on its own. He stops. He turns toward the voices. And what happens next does not look like healing yet. What he does not do is the first thing worth noticing. He does not walk across the gap. He does not reach out. He does not lay a hand on a single ruined shoulder, the way he did with the leper in Mark 1:41, where the text records the touch as the point of the whole scene. He does not speak healing over them. He does not name the disease. Luke gives us 8 words in verse 14, and all 8 are instructions about where to walk. Go, show yourselves to the priests. That is the entire sentence. Leviticus 14 laid out the protocol in detail. 17 verses of ritual, 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, hyssop, a careful examination by a priest who had to declare a person clean before they could re-enter ordinary life. The priests were the certifying officials of the ancient world for this disease. You did not become clean by feeling clean. You became clean when a man in a linen ephod looked at your skin and said so. And here is what breaks the pattern. Under the law, you went to the priests after you were healed. You did not present yourself to a priest with ruined skin and broken hands. You presented yourself restored, and the priest signed off on what had already happened. Jesus reverses the order. He sends 10 men who still carry the disease on their bodies toward an office that existed only for people who no longer carried it. He tells them to begin walking toward a verdict they have not yet earned. And Luke writes the next line carefully, Kai egeneto en to hypogein autus. And it happened, as they were going, they were cleansed. The healing lives inside the verb of walking. Not before, not after, during. You know this ache. You have been asked to move towards something you cannot yet see has been answered. A job search that has produced nothing for 14 months. A conversation you keep rehearsing with someone who may never soften. A course of treatment whose outcome no one will promise you. You are being told to present yourself somewhere before the evidence arrives. And everything in you wants the proof first and the step second. 10 men took the step first. They turned away from the only person who had ever looked at them without recoiling, and they walked in the direction of priests who had the authority to send them home. But only if something had already changed, and something had to change while they were on the road. Feet that had been numb began to register the grit of the path. The smell that had been their signature began to thin. A man looked down at his hands and did not recognize them. The obedience came before the skin did. Which makes the next question the one that breaks this story open. Because 10 bodies were cleansed, and only one of them understood what had just happened to him. Before we follow the one who turned around, we have to sit for a moment with the 9 who did not. Because something in the standard reading of this story has taught us to imagine them as ungrateful, scattered, forgetful. Men who received a gift and walked away from the giver. That is not what the text says. The text says they did exactly what Jesus told them to do. Go and show yourselves to the priests. They went. They kept going. They did not stop halfway. They did not argue. They did not negotiate. When their skin began to change somewhere along the road, they did what any devout man of Israel in the first century would have done. They hurried toward the nearest priestly station with the certification protocol of Leviticus 14, running through their minds like a liturgy they had rehearsed in private for years. The birds, the cedar, the hyssop, the 7 days of waiting outside the tent, the shaving of all the hair on the body, the second washing, the lamb for the trespass offering. These men had lost wives. They had lost the sound of their own children's voices. They had lost the right to sit at a table and tear bread with another human being. And suddenly the door back into all of it was standing open, and the key was a priest, and the priest was somewhere ahead of them on the road. Of course they kept walking. If you had been one of them, you would have kept walking too. Consider the weight they were carrying for someone else. Each of these men had a mother who had not touched his face in years. Each had a wife who had forgotten the shape of his shoulder. Each had a child who had grown up learning the word for father from a distance. The people they loved had been waiting for a letter of clearance that never came. And now the skin was clean. Now the certificate was possible. Every step toward the priest was a step toward a daughter's doorway, toward a kitchen with 2 plates on the table again. This was not ingratitude. This was the shortest line they could draw between themselves and the people who had been praying for them. And this is why the question Jesus asks in verse 17 lands the way it does. He does not ask where the 9 disobedient ones are. He asks where the 9 cleansed ones are. They are not missing because they failed. They are missing because obedience by itself turned out not to be the whole of what he was looking for. He was looking for something that obedience alone could not produce. Something that the law could issue no certificate for. Something a priest in a linen ephod was never authorized to sign. And one man, still walking with 9 others in the same direction, toward the same destination, under the same command, was about to feel that something pull at him hard enough to break the line. Picture the moment it happens. 10 men, strung out along a dirt path that climbs south toward the nearest Levitical station, their sandals throwing up small plumes of dust with every step. One of them glances down at his own forearm. The patches are gone. The silver-white scaling that had mapped his skin for years has simply lifted, the way a fever lifts overnight, leaving the brown, weathered surface of a living man. He stops walking. He does not call out to the others. He does not wait for them to notice. He pivots. Luke chose a precise word for what he does next. Hypstrepsin, the same verb Luke uses in 2:20 for the shepherds turning back from the manger, and in 24:9 for the women turning back from the empty tomb. It is the gospel's word for the return journey of someone who has seen something. It means to turn around on the road you were already traveling, to reverse your own direction, to walk against the momentum of the group you belong to. The 9 kept their faces pointed toward the certifying priest. This one turned his face back toward the man in the dust behind him, and he did not return quietly. Luke 17:15 records that he began glorifying God with a megaphone, a great voice. The same voice that had been trained for years to shout, "Tameh," the warning word of exile, now shouted praise instead. The sound that had kept people away from him was now the sound aimed straight at the only person who had not kept away. There is something here that the careful reader has to sit with. He had already received what he came for. The skin was clean. The disease was gone. By any reasonable calculation, the transaction was complete. The rabbi had given, he had received, and the road ahead led to full re-entry into normal life. Nothing required him to come back, and still a pull in him overrode the reasonable calculation. You know what this is. There is a version of you that got the answered prayer and then quietly filed it away as a coincidence, because that was easier than sitting with what it would mean if it were not one. There is a version of you that has never let yourself actually walk back to the place the help came from, because gratitude on that scale feels like owing something you are not sure you can pay. The man on the road does not hesitate. He falls on his face at the feet of Jesus. Epicen epiprosopon. Forehead to the ground, the posture Jews reserved for God alone. This is not polite thanks. This is worship. And when the rabbi looks down at the crown of this man's head and sees who is lying there, Luke slides in the one detail he has been holding back for 4 verses. The detail that is about to change the meaning of everything that just happened. Luke 17:16 ends with 5 words in Greek that rearrange everything that came before them. Kai autos on Samarites, and he was a Samaritan. Luke held this detail back on purpose. For 5 verses, the man in the dust had been one of 10. A leper, a voice, a body. And now, with his forehead pressed into the dirt at the feet of a Jewish rabbi, Luke finally tells us which side of the border he had been born on. He was one of them. The people a first-century Jew did not share a cup with, did not walk through villages of, did not speak to without cause. John 4:9 records the situation in a single line. The Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Josephus, writing in the final decade of the 1st century, describes open violence on the pilgrim roads between the two populations, Samaritans attacking Galileans passing through on their way to the Jerusalem feasts, Galileans retaliating with raids across the border. This is the enmity the man on the ground was born into. And now think through what Jesus had told the 10 to do. Go, show yourselves to the priests. For the 9 Jewish men in that group, that command had a clear destination: the temple in Jerusalem, the priestly courts that had been certifying the cleansing of lepers since the days of Moses. For this one man, the command had no such destination. Samaritans were barred from the Jerusalem temple. They worshipped on Mount Gerizim instead, at a sanctuary the Hasmoneans had destroyed more than a century earlier, its ruins still visible on the hillside above Shechem. The priestly system that could give the other 9 their certificates of cleansing had no authority over his body and no welcome for his face. He was walking toward an institution that would not receive him. And somewhere on that road, as his skin cleared, he must have realized it. The law could clean his body, but it could not let him back in. The priests could examine him, but they could not write his letter. Every step forward was a step toward a door he would still be standing outside of. Listen, there is someone hearing this who has stopped expecting to belong. You grew up watching other people move easily through a faith that has never quite made room for you. Your divorce, your doubts, the year you stopped going, the question no one in the building would answer honestly. You are still here. You still want in. But somewhere along the way you stopped believing the official door would ever open for you. The man who turned around on that road knew that feeling in his bones. He had no priest. He had no temple that would take him. He had only the one person who had already looked across the gap and heard him the first time. So he went to the one source that had not refused him. And it turned out that source was enough. What the institution could not give him, the man in the road was about to. And what comes next in verse 17 is the question that exposes the whole scene. Jesus looks down at the man at his feet and then he lifts his eyes and speaks. But not to him. Not yet. His first words after the Samaritan falls are not addressed to the Samaritan at all. They are addressed to no one in particular, aimed into the empty space of the road where 9 other men used to be. Luke 17:17 records it with unusual care. Apokritheus deho Jesus ipen, Jesus answering said. Answering what, though? No one had asked him anything. The text uses the word for response when there was no question in the air, which means Luke wants us to understand that what Jesus says next is itself a response. To the scene, to the absence, to something unspoken hanging over the moment. And what he says is not a statement. It is 3 questions in a row. Were not the 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was none found returning to give glory to God except this foreigner? 3, not 1. Read them slowly and listen to what they actually are. The first names the fact. 10 were cleansed, all 10, the count is precise. The second opens the wound. Where are they? The third lands the blade, was no one found, except this one. And the word he uses for the Samaritan in verse 18 is the word that would have made every Jewish listener flinch. Allegenes, foreigner, the same word that was carved into the stone balustrade of the Jerusalem temple, warning any non-Jew that crossing the line meant death. Archaeologists pulled two of those warning stones out of the ground in 1871 and 1935. The letters are still legible. The word allegenes was the word of the barrier. And Jesus puts it in his own mouth here to describe the only person who came back. He is not scolding. Listen again. He is not calling the 9 wicked. He does not chase after them. He does not send disciples to drag them back. He simply asks 3 questions into the air and lets them hang there. That is what makes these 2 verses so unsettling. Luke could have given us a verdict. He gives us questions instead. And questions from the mouth of Jesus always do a specific kind of work. They open a space in the listener where an answer was supposed to live, and when nothing arrives to fill it, the emptiness itself becomes the teaching. There is someone hearing this who still shows up, who still keeps the practice of prayer, still sits through the service, still does what devout people are supposed to do. And the words have gone flat in the mouth. You are not disobedient. You are not missing. You are exactly where you were told to be. And still something in the 3 questions Jesus just asked touches the nerve you have been pretending is not there. The nerve that knows compliance is not the same as return. He is not asking where the 9 went. He is asking where the turning is. Where is the voice that came back? And now he does turn, this time directly to the one who did. Verse 19. Jesus lowers his eyes to the man still pressed into the dust at his sandals and speaks to him alone. Anastas periou, rise, go. And then 4 words that were never spoken to the other 9. He pistis so sesoken si. Your faith has saved you. Set the 2 sentences side by side and the shape of the scene changes completely. What the 10 received on the road? Porithentes epideixate hodis toi hierosin. Go show yourselves to the priests. 8 words of instruction, aimed at a destination, addressed to a group. What this one receives at the feet of a rabbi he had no business kneeling before. Rise, go, your trust has rescued you. A benediction, a personal address. A verb with weight the other verb did not carry. Because the word here is not ekatharis theson. The word Luke used back in verse 14, when skin turned over and scales fell off. That word means cleansed, rendered ritually clean, restored to the physical condition required for re-entry. All 10 received ekatharis theson. The word now in Jesus' mouth is sesoken, the perfect tense of sozo, and it does something different. Sozo in the Greek of Luke's gospel means to rescue, to deliver, to save in the full sense. It is the verb Luke uses in 8:48 when Jesus tells the woman who touched the hem of his cloak the same sentence. Your faith has saved you. It is the verb in 7:50 to the woman weeping on his feet. Your faith has saved you. It is the verb that appears on the lips of the thief beside him at Golgotha in 23:39. Save yourself and us. It is the verb that Peter will use in Acts 4:12. There is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be sozo. This is the vocabulary of salvation, not hygiene. 9 men received healing, 1 received rescue. And notice where the difference lands. Jesus does not say your return has saved you. He does not say your gratitude has saved you. He does not say your worship has saved you, even though the man just worshipped him. He names the thing underneath all of it. He pistis su, your trust. The same trust that made him shout across the 4-cubit gap when the law said he could not be heard. The same trust that made his feet move toward a priesthood that would not receive him. The same trust that pulled him off the road when 9 others kept going. The one who had been given the least reason to hope, the foreigner, the heretic, the man with no temple, turned out to be carrying the one thing Jesus was looking for the whole time. And the word Jesus places on him here will not fit inside what the skin alone received. Which means we have to ask what exactly is the distance between a body that has been cleansed and a person who has been saved, and why of the 10 only 1 crossed it. Stand in that distance for a moment. On the road south, somewhere between the village on the border and the Levitical station ahead, 9 men are walking with skin a priest can certify. They have received an enormous thing. Their bodies have been handed back to them. They will sit at tables again, hold the hands of children who have forgotten their touch, sleep under roofs they had been exiled from for years. None of that is small. None of that is undone by what Jesus said in verse 17. What Luke is showing us is not that the 9 received nothing. It is that what they received stopped at the skin. Healing, in the vocabulary Luke has been building carefully since verse 14, is what happens to a body. Salvation, in the vocabulary Jesus places on the Samaritan in verse 19, is what happens to a person. And the hinge between the two, the narrow passage that the one man crossed and the nine did not, is the return. Remember what the Greek of verse 14 said. Ekatharistheson, they were cleansed, in the aorist tense, inside the walking. The trust was already working before any of them could see the result. All 10 had it. All 10 stepped without proof. That is why all 10 were cleansed. But trust that lasts only until the evidence arrives is not the same thing as trust that recognizes the source once the evidence is there. The first gets you a clean body. The second gets you a new life. 9 men trusted enough to start walking. 1 man trusted enough to walk back. He saw what the others saw. The same arms, the same hands, the same skin. What broke the line was not better eyes. It was the conclusion he drew from what he saw. The other 9 looked at their skin and saw a gift. He looked at his skin and saw a giver. And he understood, somewhere in that first heartbeat after the change, that a gift this size meant the giver was someone his life could not go back to being the same around. You have felt this difference without having words for it. There is the moment something finally breaks in your favor. The scan comes back clean, the job comes through, the child comes home, and there is the very next moment, the quiet one, where you have to decide what to do with the relief. You can file it under luck and keep walking, or you can stop on the road and let it mean something. Most of us keep walking. The man in the dust did not. That is what the word sezikin is naming, not a better healing, a different category. And Luke has been setting up this distinction from the first verse, asking his reader to notice that obedience can carry a body all the way to the priest and still leave the person unfinished. The question the text leaves open as Jesus raises this one man from the ground is the one we have not yet asked out loud. Why him? Why the foreigner? Why the one with nothing to bring? Here is the answer to the question Luke has been holding open since verse 11. Why him? Because he was the only one whose hope had nowhere else to land. The 9 had a system. They had a temple, a priesthood, a protocol, a structure built to receive them on the other side of the healing. Their gratitude had somewhere to go that was not Jesus. They could give thanks at the altar in Jerusalem. They could offer the lamb prescribed in Leviticus 14:10. They had institutions waiting to absorb the meaning of what had happened to them and translate it into something orderly. The man from Samaria had none of that. The temple at Gerizim was a field of broken stones. The temple in Jerusalem had a balustrade with his exclusion carved into it. There was no priest who would receive his offering, no altar that would accept his lamb, no liturgy that had a place for his thanks. So when his skin cleared on that road, and he understood what had just been given to him, the gratitude in his chest had only one direction it could move. Backward, toward the man who had heard him. This is the closing of every loop in the story. I told you at the beginning, you would meet a Greek word that placed the healing inside the walking. Ekatharistheson, in verse 14. The cleansing happening in motion before any of them could see it. There it is. All 10 carried that trust far enough to start. I told you a sentence Jesus would say to one man that he did not say to the other 9. Sezikin, in verse 19, the verb of rescue, of salvation in the full sense, given only to the one who came back. There it is. And I told you the identity of the only one who turned around, and why Luke withheld it for 5 verses. He was a Samaritan, a foreigner, a man with no priest, no temple, no certifying institution. The one with the least standing in the religious world of the first century turned out to be the only one whose trust took him all the way past the gift and into the presence of the giver. There is no record of what happened to him after he stood up from the dust. Luke does not name him. Tradition gave him names later in the apocryphal Acts, but the gospel itself leaves him nameless on the road, walking away with a sentence in his ears no priest could have spoken over him. The 9, also nameless, walked into re-entry, into kitchens and marriages and the sound of their own children using the word for father at close range. That was real. That was given. Luke does not begrudge them a single sandal of it. He only places the 2 endings side by side and lets the reader feel the difference. There is someone hearing this who has been carrying a prayer for so long, the asking has worn smooth in your mouth. You stopped expecting an answer the way you stopped expecting snow in summer. Not bitterly, just realistically. There is someone else still showing up to a marriage that looks finished from every angle, putting plates on the table for a person who has not really been at it in years. There is someone 3 hours into a sleepless night, listening to the refrigerator hum and rehearsing a fear about a child you cannot reach. There is someone who confessed a thing years ago, was told it was forgiven, and has never been able to set it down. There is someone listening right now from outside every door, divorced, doubting, walked away in a year that everyone else seems to have forgotten, convinced that the official welcome has already passed you by. Hear what the man on the road heard. Sesakin, your trust has saved you, not your access, not your standing, not your record. The thing in you that kept calling across the gap when the law of your own life said you had no right to call. The thing in you that turned back when keeping going would have been easier. Jesus did not require him to bring credentials. He required him to bring himself. That is what is being asked of you. The next time the answered prayer arrives, however small, a difficult conversation that did not destroy you, a fear that did not come true, an unexpected hour of peace in a season that has had none. Do not file it. Stop on the road. Let yourself say out loud where it came from. You do not need a priest in the room. You do not need a temple you have permission to enter. You only need to turn. Let us pray. Father, we have walked the road of the 9 more often than we have walked the road of the 1. We have taken what you have given us and hurried on toward our priests, our certifications, our small re-entries, without stopping in the dust to recognize whose hand it came from. Forgive us for filing your gifts under coincidence. Forgive us for receiving the cleansing and missing the saving. We thank you for the word sesakin, that what you offer is not only skin but life, not only relief but rescue. Find in us today the trust of the foreigner who had nowhere else to take his gratitude. Teach us to turn around on the roads we are already walking. Let us be the one who came back. Amen. One last thing before you go. Of everything in this story, tell me which moment stopped you. Was it the 8 words Jesus spoke that sent 10 men toward priests before any of them were healed? Was it the 2 warning stones pulled from the temple ruins, with the word allergene still legible after 2,000 years? Or was it the sentence aimed at one man alone, in a verb the other 9 never heard? Leave a comment with the moment that landed. I sit with what you write. Next, we go to a different road, a different night, and a question Jesus asked Peter 3 times by a charcoal fire, and the precise Greek word he changed on the 3rd, asking that almost no English translation preserves. Do not miss it.